Mason Companies can trace its history directly back to the lumbering era.
August came to Chippewa in 1850, and he came to work in the lumbering industry. They started out by supplying product to logging camps and selling logs to the mills here in Chippewa Falls. That in itself was quite entrepreneurial.
By 1890, he was one of the key subcontractors to the larger lumbering companies, providing lumber to the mills as well as camp services. It is estimated he made almost $250,000 in his most successful year. Mason kept the camps open until 1903, when he saw that much of the great forests of Wisconsin were cut over and only a small amount of timber remained. Realizing the Chippewa Valley's lumbering days were numbered, he retired.
It goes back to August and probably Bert's entrepreneurial spirit. They saw the logging industry dying out. There were only so many logs that could be harvested. They had experience in footwear.
The Masons did not start their venture from scratch. They purchased the tools and stock from the independent Handmade Shoe Company. Ironically, their primary market was the lumber industry. They offered handmade boots for loggers and mill workers. Business was good almost from the start. And within 2 years, the company moved from its original small factory into larger quarters on North Bridge Street. With the growth they were experiencing, they realized the business needed to be formalized, and in 1906, the company was officially incorporated as the Mason Shoe Manufacturing Company. The company grew with the city and the region, as the area made the transition from a lumbering economy to a farming and industrial economy. In 1911, the large mill that dominated Chippewa Falls for 3 decades cut its last log.
Well, as the lumbering industry was disappearing, August would make product other than the logging boots and put them in small stores around the Chippewa Valley community for sale.
Mason Shoe weathered the changes and continued to grow. Stock was sold to further capitalize and allow it to expand. As the company neared its 3rd decade, it could reflect on considerable success. It had survived the often difficult first few years of any new business, and it had carved a successful niche in the regional shoe market. The 1920s were a catalyst of change for almost all of the United States, and this decade would also help usher dramatic changes for the Mason Shoe Company. For the first time, more people lived in cities than in rural areas. Cities were becoming fully electric, and telephones became more common. As the Masons thought about their business, they realized that they had to make changes or risk closing, like some other shoe companies in Chippewa Falls. The Masons devised a marketing plan that they would end up following for more than 50 years. Direct sales of their shoes to consumers.
Well, catalog sales were part of our economy, but he picked out a small niche and decided to do a catalog. More than that, he decided to do it in a direct selling method where people could earn some money by selling the product that he manufactured.
The legend is that one of the shareholders had that idea to solicit salespeople, like the Fuller Brush Company did, like other salespeople were going door to door at that time and were carrying around kits and selling products. And the idea was, okay, maybe this would work for us. Maybe this is how we can grow. And for much of the history of the company, that was the model. That was, it grew into a big, glossy, beautiful catalog that was durable. You could carry that around for 6 months without it wearing out and show it to people.
Salesmen were recruited in magazines and matchboxes, promising the opportunity to make money by selling shoes in their spare time. Thousands of men responded to the ads. Once a job inquiry was made, the company sent these prospects a catalog along with some tips on how to successfully sell shoes.
And they were hosting these sales events, training salespeople in these different venues. So they would literally, make an East Coast tour. A really interesting time in the history of the country because of what was going on economically and the Great Depression. It was effective because the timing was right. But it's funny, we used to have, those little matchbooks that would say, ask me about Mason shoes, and we had access to the little sales kits that they used to provide to salesmen. And it was a fascinating, very, very different time.
It was clear that direct sales was the way to go. And through the 1930s, even during the difficult times of the Great Depression, the company slowly expanded the catalog offerings as well as catalog sales. Mason Shoe began retail operations in 1928 when it opened the Factory Shoe Store.
Well, the retail store opened in Chippewa in the basement of the manufacturing plant initially. It was small. That manufacturing plant housed the entire operation, and the store was part of it. The Mason family became pretty well known in our community. The citizens knew we manufactured footwear, and they would like to buy some. And it didn't make sense for them to send an order in from their home in Chippewa Falls to Mason's and then have it delivered to them in the mail. So a store was opened to service the citizens here in Chippewa Falls.
They sold predominantly overruns, factory seconds, and sometimes when shoes would get tried on, somebody would buy a pair of shoes, they'd try them on, and they wouldn't walk around on a carpeted floor, they would scuff them up a little bit on the bottom. Those would have to go to the factory store and be sold as seconds then.
B.A. Burt Mason had been involved in the company since it was founded in 1904, serving as manager from the beginning. His own death in 1945 at the age of 65 rocked the company. Some of the next generations of Masons were mostly away fighting overseas, and transition from B.A. Mason's leadership was not easy. This next generation, led by Owen, Ned, and Victor Mason, inherited a company that had been conservatively run, was growing, and was on sound financial footing. While the company was expanding in the 1950s, the methods of selling shoes and the types of shoes available stayed the same. By the late 1950s, the company had to expand its physical plant. In 1958, the clerical staff moved to a new office near the original factory. The 1960s brought many changes to the company. Edward Ned Mason passed away in 1961. Many of the day-to-day details of running a growing company fell on Owen Mason's shoulders. Victor Mason was in many ways crucial to this stage of the company's history. He knew how to make shoes, he was mechanically oriented, and he was not afraid of new technology.
Victor considered himself a frustrated engineer, and he shined with that engineering bent when the new factory was built in the late 60s. He ended up being responsible for the entire operation. He saw the value of a name and address that the company owned. The question was, well, how are we going to get more name and addresses to sell footwear to? And the recruiting for direct selling salesman type people really started blossoming when computers came out. The story behind that is that Owen Mason, the CEO, and Victor, operations, and our president, Mr. Dale Kale, went out to California to listen to a 3-day presentation by IBM about how computers can help your business. When they came back, they were convinced, being a database company now, the real value is in names and addresses, millions of them, that computers could really help this business. So for 2 days, Victor Mason and Mr. Kale worked on making a presentation to Owen, the CEO, to get approval to get a computer. And on the second day, Owen came to the office. He stopped at Mr. Kale's office and said, "Those computers, order one." And that was the way Mason got a computer, and there was nothing more to it than that.
As the company grew in size and in sales, it also assumed a more important role in the city of Chippewa Falls and the surrounding area. The company had a long tradition of charitable giving in the community. In the early 1950s, the family had established a charitable trust called the B.A. Mason Trust, named after the founder of the company.
The trust was established to give back to the community. B.A. Mason, August Mason, all of August's children all realize that every social problem that is in our community walks in the door with each employee that comes to work at Mason's. The trust was established to give back to the community in the most positive way possible to support families and to support good social health within our community.
Because the community has been so important to the company and the family, the B.A. Mason Trust was established as a charitable arm for the company, really. And the B.A. Mason Trust was a way of giving back to the community. They were quietly funding the YMCA, for example, and St. Joseph's Hospital, and kids' sports here in town. They were quietly funding those things, and it was really a way of giving back to the community.
As the 1980s progressed, the changing market conditions and foreign competition would challenge the company and force dramatic changes to survive. The tide changed quickly for the company. New trade agreements made it easier for companies to shift production overseas. Mason Shoes continued to make its shoes in Chippewa Falls, but soon found itself competing with companies benefiting from lower costs abroad. It was also becoming clear to the company management that the direct sales model that had served the company so well for almost 60 years was becoming less effective. While the company adapted to new technologies, new ways of selling shoes, and even to new products, it couldn't adapt to increasing foreign competition.
As the footwear industry moved overseas, this became a threat to our manufacturing facility. When I started at Mason's in 1972, there were 730 manufacturing plants in this country. When I retired in 2004, there were 130. So of course, our plant didn't survive. It was heartbreaking. We should have closed that plant 5 years before we did. Probably the saddest day of my career was going over and talking to the people within the plant and telling them we're going to be closing.
Mason faced the future not as a manufacturer of shoes, but as a distributor of shoes and apparel. With changes and innovation came a new name, the Mason Companies.
They had to figure out a way to continue to be a company and operate when manufacturing was hit by really, really hard times. And the way that they did it was expanded product. They went outside of footwear. They started selling, other people's footwear first. And then the idea came up, well, we can try to sell apparel. The Wissota Trader catalog was launched. And they learned a lot through launching that, and that was probably the impetus to have all these different catalogs in our catalog collection right now, coming up with new products to fill those catalogs. And then ultimately launching a credit venture. That was just ingenious. And that's now our single biggest catalog or brand that we have today is our Stoneberry catalog. And that all came about because they were trying to find, the fourth generation was trying to find ways to do something different, sell different products, sell more products, sell stuff that we can't manufacture anymore. What can we get to sell? How can we put it together in a creative way that people will want to pick up that catalog when it hits their mailbox?
Mason's credit program has become a point of distinction, serving a market that normally would be ignored. Mason fills a void by providing access to great products with the availability to pay over time. Mason currently owns 9 brands. 6 of them are credit brands, which provide credit services to underserved markets. Massey's, Mason Easy Pay, Stoneberry, Gallery, K. Jordan, and Fifth and Glam. The 3 cash brands are Shoe Mall, Maryland Square, and B.A. Mason. The spirit of August, B.A. Mason, and the previous generations continues to live on. The team is committed to carrying Mason's proud traditions of entrepreneurialism and continuous reinvention. Looking forward, Mason Companies will continue investing in expanding teams and strengthening their agency partners to grow investments in technology. By cultivating best practices in e-commerce, Mason Companies will be positioned to take the customer experience to the next level. With an increase in sales through the digital channels, Mason's goal is to become the #1 e-commerce retailer serving underserved credit markets. With credit being a great cornerstone of who Mason is and what makes them distinct, they are looking ahead to innovations that can grow their credit services. Mason remains a family company, and the 5th and 6th generations of descendants of August and B.A. Mason are now working with the company.
It's that entrepreneurial spirit, but that's driven by the family's commitment to the business, the employees, the community. The family has been very clear about what they want. They want to remain a family-owned business. So it allows us to operate the company in a very particular way. You know, we are not in it for the short term. We are operating for a very long-term vision. So we are not taking on too much risk. We're not chasing anything. We're not trying to create significant growth in order to create a sell opportunity. We operate this for the long term. So we're operating it for not only this year, but this decade and this generation, for purposes of passing it on to the next generation, which is a very different way than many businesses operate.
Mason prides itself on being part of the community, being a family-owned business, and being a people-first, values-driven organization, and looks forward to being a part of the Chippewa Falls community for many years to come.